Greetings. Welcome to the screencast for the CNDC budget template. We've made a number of changes to the template, so we thought it would be helpful to put together a little recording just to walk you through some of those changes. And for those of you who are new to our template, to show you kind of what it's all about and how it functions. So as you'll see down at the bottom, there are a number of tabs, and most of those are new for those of you who have seen them before. But the first page is just the instruction page, and a lot of this we're going to go through, so I'm not going to spend any time on the instructions themselves. But up here at the top, there are 3 blanks that need to be filled in. The first is your project name. This helps us when you send the file to us to be entered into the accounting system. If we end up with multiples that are titled the same way, for instance, just 2018 budget, helps us know which one belongs to whom. The next one is the person filling out your budget. This just helps us know who to call if we have a question about it as we're entering it into the accounting system. And this last box, we frequently get the question, well, what do I do about my carryover from the prior year? Well, your carryover is really part of your net assets. And so this box allows you to input your projected net assets as of the end of the year, what you think will be on that line on your financial statements. And then this is going to calculate, given what you do with your budget, where would you expect to be at the end of 2018? And this becomes important if you're putting together a deficit budget. If you plan next year to spend more than you bring in, this will tell you whether that deficit is more than you can absorb given what you have on the books at the end of this year. The next tab doesn't require any sort of entry, and in fact doesn't allow any sort of entry. This is just the overview. Once you're done inputting all of your data, it's going to show up here for you to take a look at. And this is the page that we're going to use when we enter the budget into the accounting system. And we do enter it by month, and so whatever shows up here is what we're going to put into the system. So make sure you review this when you're all done, make sure it looks the way you want it to. The next tab, the Personnel tab, is going to be the first stop for those of you who either currently have employees or who anticipate having employees at some point during 2018. So we're going to walk through this quick. First column here is to input some sort of an indicator as to the position. Now, it doesn't matter to us whether you put in a job title or a name or some combination of the two. However, it's easiest for you to identify who it is you're talking about. So for our demonstration purposes, we're going to put in an executive director. And maybe we'll put in a project manager and an admin position. And we'll leave it at that just for demonstration purposes. And this does allow you to put in a number of folks, with 34 blanks for employees. For most of you, that should be more than enough. If you have more than that and you're able to combine positions, if you have multiple positions that earn the same thing over the same time period, then that's a good way to deal with that. The next column here allows you to put in the amount of wages you actually intend to pay someone in 2018. So you don't need to worry for this purpose about how many hours they work. It's just how much will you be paying them in 2018. So let's say that our executive director in this example is going to make $60,000, and our project manager is going to make $40,000, and our admin person is maybe going to make $20,000. Next column asks you how many hours they're going to work per week. What the system does is looks at this number to decide how much cost you will incur for that person's benefits. This benefit cost is prorated based on the number of hours worked during the week. So we're going to say the executive director and the project manager are both salaried, so they intend to work 40 hours a week. Say your admin position is part-time and is only going to work 20 hours a week. Next column is just a chance for you to indicate whether or not these people will be participating in your 401k plan. I strongly recommend that you say yes to this for everyone. Your employees could choose to join the plan at any point during the year, and so it's best to account for that in case they make that choice. Similarly, the next column wants to know about benefits, and it's the same sort of question. And I would again strongly encourage that everyone who's eligible for benefits get marked yes here. Now, your admin position because they're only scheduled for 20 hours a week, technically isn't eligible for benefits. But if you're in doubt about that, you can go ahead and put yes in this column. The template will know not to account for any benefits based on that number of hours. But we're going to say no because we think that person is not eligible and probably won't be at any point during the year. This column gives you the opportunity to put in hire date. For folks who have been employed for some time, this is less important. But if you have someone who has been hired within the last year, this allows the template to know when they're eligible to start the 401k plan. And so that can be really helpful. So let's say that your executive director was hired July 1st of 2012, and your project manager, we're going to say was hired August 1st of 2017. And the admin position, let's say in this one that you intend to hire this person in the upcoming year. They're not currently on the payroll, but you intend to hire them on July 1st of 2018. The review and raise date is a good way to allow for budgeting for salary increases during the year. So this may or may not be someone's anniversary date, depending on if they've changed position during hire. But for the sake of these folks, let's say that their reviews will be taking place on their anniversary dates. This person obviously wouldn't be until 2019, but the system won't let you put in a date outside of the current year. So we'll cheat that one a little bit. Oh, take that back. We'll just leave it at. So the last one is, what % increase do you anticipate budgeting for these folks? And so we're going to say we're going to anticipate a 5% increase during the year. The system will then calculate that increase based on this review date. So it'll calculate their scheduled salary here up through that review date and then increase it accordingly. This last column gives you the opportunity, if you are budgeting for a position that you anticipate ending at some point during the year, you can just select the last month you anticipate that person working, and then the system will stop calculating a salary for them at that point. I'm not going to use that in this particular example, but this is really helpful for seasonal employees. You can put in their hire date and the end date, and the template will calculate their salary just for that period. So you'll see over here that because we've indicated no for benefits for our admin position that doesn't work enough hours, no benefit cost is calculated. And you'll see that although we said yes for the 401k, this person isn't eligible for 401k because they have been employed for less than a year. So there's no 401k cost. And our project manager, because they were hired August 1st of 2017, isn't really eligible for 401k until September of 2018. So there's a minimal cost here because the template's only calculating their 401k match starting in September. So this lets you take a variety of things into account, so that should be pretty helpful. And then you can see what is budgeted for that person for each of the various expenses. As a reminder, our healthcare benefit plan year starts May 1st. And so the budget template assumes a 10% increase in benefit cost. We won't know what that is until well after budgets have been entered. So that's what we guess. And it does start that cost increase in May. So moving on, for those of you who do not have grants, this will be really the last page that you need to worry about. And so there is an opportunity here at the top to record your anticipated revenue. There are spots for corporate and foundation grants or awards, but make sure you only input anything here if you expect those to be just general operating awards that you can spend however you want. If you anticipate there being some sort of a restriction, then we'll use these tabs that follow. But for our purposes, we're going to guess that we're going to get a corporate donation from, say, Walmart. And we expect that award to arrive in July for $50,000. All right, now you'll see that the personnel expenses that you entered have carried forward here. You'll also see, if you scroll down, that the project fee calculates automatically. So Again, for our purpose, we're going to come up here and put in a foundation grant. Maybe we think the Rose Community Foundation is going to provide us award in November for $15,000. You can budget down here for any sort of other revenue that you anticipate. Maybe that you have a special event that you're going to do at some point during the year. Maybe that's going to be in April, and you anticipate raising $5,000. Just drop that in. And so this is really just a fill in the blank section. Now, throughout the template, you're only going to enter information in the cells that are highlighted green. Everything else is actually locked to make sure that formulas don't get corrupted. So any cell that's green is a spot where you can enter information. The expenses section works exactly the same way. Whatever cells are highlighted green is where you would enter expenses. So maybe you anticipate spending $500 a month in contract labor. So we can enter that. And maybe your rent is going to be an additional $500 a month. So you can enter in whatever sort of operating expenses you have for the year, and just make sure you enter it in the month where you expect that to happen. If you don't know, or if you expect it to happen sporadically throughout the year without any particular rhyme or reason, then I would just spread it out evenly across the year. For budgeting purposes, that should be close enough. Get down at the bottom, and it will indicate for you your total expenses. And then down at the bottom is your total revenue over expense. So at the moment, you can see we have budgeted for a pretty significant deficit because we've only entered a minimal amount of revenue. So again, if you don't have any grants, this is going to be your last stop. You'll enter everything here, and then you would be able to see that on the instruction tab. If we had projected perhaps to have $100,000 worth of net assets at year end, we've budgeted for that deficit. And so that would leave us at the end of 2018 with about $7,400 in net assets. So it's pretty straightforward if you don't have any sort of restricted grants or government contracts that you're anticipating. For those of you who do have grants, we're going to spend a pretty significant amount of time here on these other tabs just to show how that functions. So this next tab here will be a roll-up of these individual grant tabs. And the template has 15 of them, so you can budget for 15 separate grants or contracts independently, and then it will roll all of those up onto this grant summary tab. So we're going to enter a couple of grants and then come back here so you can see how that looks. So for our first grant, our first stop here is the funder box. And as the little note here points out, if you do not enter a funder name, whatever you put on this tab is not going to get rolled up into the grant summary. Now we've done that on purpose to allow you to look at some different grant scenarios. If you're applying for grants but you're not sure that you're going to get them, this allows you to put them in or take them out of your total budget kind of at will to be able to see how that would impact things. So, but let's say we anticipate getting an award from the Denver Foundation. The next thing you'll tell the template is what type of award this is. And so there are three choices: government contract, a foundation grant, or we do sometimes see corporate grants come in as well. This obviously is going to be a foundation grant. We need to tell it how much we anticipate that being. So perhaps we think we're going to get $100,000 from the Denver Foundation. Then for foundation and corporate grants only, we need to tell it what month we anticipate that coming in, just like we did on the unrestricted funds tab. So for our purposes, I guess we need something at the beginning of the year, so perhaps we see that coming in February. Now there is a note here that you'll see that if the award was received in 2017 and you're just spending it down in 2018, then you want to leave the award month blank. That will prevent the revenue from getting booked in 2018 on your budget because you've already recognized that revenue in 2017. So, but for our purpose, we're going to say that it took place in February. Now, if we're going to code employee time to the grant, we have a number of things we need to do. If you're not coding employee time, then you can just come down here and enter whatever other operating expenses are going to be covered. If you have rent being paid, if you have contract labor being paid, whatever that might be that's being covered, that would all be entered here. And for our purposes, we're going to spend more time on the personnel expenses because that's where kind of the vast majority of things tend to happen with grants. So for employee time coding, the first thing we need to tell the template is what month are we going to start incurring costs? When are employees going to start coding their time to this? Because we're anticipating receiving the grant in February, we maybe won't have employees coding time until March. So we're going to tell the system to start looking at that in March. If we anticipate ending employee time coding during the same year, we can include that here. For our purpose, we're going to say that all of this time coding is going to bleed into 2019, and so we'll be leaving this field blank. We'll come over here, and we'll tell the template which of our staff members is going to be coding time to this grant. So maybe it's going to be the executive director. The system is going to automatically assume that all of that person's time is being coded to the grant, but we know that's generally not the case. So what we need to tell the system is, on average, how many number of hours a week do we expect this person to be working on the grant or contract? And so perhaps here that's going to be 10 hours a week. You'll see that the template comes in and starts in March, and it includes 10 hours a week worth of personnel cost and all of the associated benefits and payroll taxes. I mentioned before that the benefits cost increases in May, and so you'll see that floating through. And we'd also budgeted a salary increase for this particular position starting in July, and so you'll see that is incorporated here as well. Maybe our project manager is going to spend 5 hours a week, and our admin assistant is not going to work at all on this particular grant. So that gives you an idea of how that works. You can budget for up to 12 people to work on a particular contract. Again, if you need more than that, maybe take a look at, well, if you need more than that, probably contact me and we'll figure out what to do from there. Let's say that this particular grant is also going to cover some, maybe it'll do some staff training that we think is probably going to happen in July, and also some evaluation that we think will take place in September. So at this point, we've got $38,000 worth of expenses booked on a $100,000 grant. So that would leave us $61,000 and change going into 2019. And so for the moment, we're going to leave that grant as it is. Come to this next grant, and this time we think we're going to get a grant from Denver Human Services. And this one is going to be a government grant. The amount is less critical on government grant because it's all reimbursement. But let's say that we anticipate this contract being for $75,000. Because this is not a foundation or a corporate grant, the starting month or the award month doesn't matter. What matters here is when we intend to start coding time to it, which would be based on the contract. So because we don't want a starting month, there's actually not even a choice here. So we don't have to worry about accidentally selecting that. So let's say that our contract says that we can start coding time, start incurring costs in June on this grant. And this one is also going to carry forward in 2019, so we're going to leave the end month blank. In this case, our executive director is going to work 5 hours a week on this particular grant. Our project manager this time is going to put in 10 hours a week. And so our admin person is going to put in 2 hours a week. So much like on the foundation grant, you'll see that the personnel expenses section fills in accordingly. Because this is a government grant and all of the revenue is based on expenses, it's calculating the revenue accordingly. And then you could come down and add in whatever other expenses you think you might incur. Hard to say what that might be here. But let's say that there are some printing costs at $50 a month, and that will run through end of December. Doesn't want to let me do that because there are some merged cells in there, so we'll type that in individually. And maybe there are some program supplies also included in this, and you think that will start in September, $250 a month. But again, you could obviously fill in whatever numbers you need to down here to match up with your grant budget. Revenue over expense is 0, as it should be on a reimbursable contract. And so that has now all been filled in. So if we were to go back to the grant summary page, you'll see that the foundation grant revenue has been dropped in, the government revenue has been dropped in, all of the personnel expenses that were included on each individual grant have been included, and then the numbers that we put in for other operating expenses have also been included. So you will see that for, if we were looking at just our grants for the year, revenue exceeds expense by about $61,000. Now, if we were to go back to the unrestricted funds tab, you'll see here that the personnel expense is much lower in these following months. So what the tab here is doing is taking the total personnel costs from your personnel tab, and it's subtracting out everything that you're coding to grants in order to tell you what other funding you need to be able to raise and provide to cover all of your personnel costs for the year. So this is really calculating personnel minus whatever's on your grant summary results in your unrestricted funds cost. So that's a good way to take a look and be able to see what additional money you think you might need to raise during the year. For one more illustrative purpose, let's come to grant 3, and let's say that this one we intend, or this is actually a government contract that we received in 2017 that's carrying through into 2018 for part of the year. So maybe this one is from CDOT, and this is a government grant. We're going to input the amount that we anticipate having left to spend in 2018. And so this might be $35,000. Because this started in 2017, we're going to leave the start month blank. And we're going to say that this one ends in April. Executive director is going to work on this. Now, if you will recall, the executive director, we've put in 5 hours on that grant. We've got 10 hours on that grant, so that's 15 hours a week, which would leave us 25 hours a week to work on this contract. But let's say we're not really thinking about what we've put in. We're going to put in 30 hours a week here. And we're going to have our project manager working an additional 5 hours a week. So there's our total cost. And the rest of that has filled out just like it did before. You will have noticed before I put in the hours per week that the amount column here, or the amount cell, became highlighted red. What that's telling you is that the total costs that you've got budgeted for this grant exceed the amount you thought you would have left to spend. So you would need to come in here and make some sort of an adjustment to get those costs down to be in line with the amount you had. And again, the reason it's doing that is it assumes here that the project manager is working 40 hours per week. Now it would do the same thing on a foundation grant. If we were to accidentally, let's say, how much do we have left? We had 61,000 on this. Let's say we had a typing error in our evaluation and assessment. We typed in $75,000. Our total costs have now exceeded the amount of the award, and so it highlights it red and lets us know. So we have attempted to build in here one extra little catch for you in the event that you, as I mentioned, forget to keep track of how many hours you have already budgeted for someone. So if you will recall, we have here 5 hours for the executive director, 10 hours here, and then I've entered 40 here just to show you what might happen. If we go back to the grant summary, knowing that we've budgeted too many hours, you'll see that in April, personnel has turned red. And so what that's telling you is that for the month of April, you have more personnel cost budgeted to your grants collectively than you have budgeted when actually inputting your personnel. So obviously that's not going to catch if you have under budgeted for one position for the month and over budgeted for others, which is what we have here in January through March. We didn't have more than the allotted number of hours for all employees in those months, but in April we did. So you'll still want to pay attention to that, but hopefully that this will just help you catch in the event that you make a mistake. So if you see red in one month, you might also check the surrounding months to make sure that no other adjustments are needed, but hopefully that will help. So again, you can budget for all of those separately. It'll all combine here. Whatever is left to be raised will drop into the unrestricted funds. And you can see here that we have a couple of months where we've budgeted more in employee expense than we anticipate having. And so we have a negative number. So we would want to come back in March and April, one of our grants. And that's really occurring because, as I said here, we weren't paying attention. We bumped that to 25, and we didn't have 40 hours left for our project manager. So we had 5 hours left for that person to work. Now if we come into the unrestricted funds tab, you'll see that no longer have any negative numbers. So we haven't over budgeted for personnel. Total revenue over expense on the unrestricted funds side is negative $37,000. The grant side, we had a positive $66,000. So when we come back to the total budget, you'll see that all of that information has been dropped in here. Come down to the bottom, and we end up with a surplus for the year of $29,000. The last line here on the total budget just tells us what the total is for the year as you roll along. So at any given month end during the year, this is where you would expect to be if your budget all happens according to plan. And so at December 31st, you will see that the number there equals the total for the year. And if we were to come back to the instructions tab, you'll see that that has carried through. We anticipated leaving December 31st of 2017 with 100,000. We would have a net increase of 29,000. So we would have net assets at the end of 2018 of 129,000. So we have worked pretty hard to allow you to do some more complex budgeting than you have been able to do in the past, at least based on our template. And so hopefully you find this helpful. If you have any questions as you're working through this, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or to any member of the accounting team, and we can certainly help you through it. Play around with it a little bit. If you have questions, obviously give us a call, but hopefully you find it helpful. And happy budgeting.